I'm Jim Irwin, Chair of the Riding Mountain Biosphere Reserve, and I'll be hosting tonight's workshop along with the help of Dennis Hodgson and Daryl Kynes. To begin with, I would like to acknowledge that the Riding Mountain Biosphere Reserve is in Treaty 2 and 4 territories of the Anishinaabe people, and say that we respect and share their all-important teachings that water is a sacred gift. Since 1986, Riding Mountain Biosphere Reserve has been bringing people together to share their knowledge for the well-being of our communities. And in this respect, tonight we're pleased to have Bruno Bruederlin share his knowledge of our Prairie lakes in this session of our Lake Stewardship Workshop. As many of us know, Bruno is a retired biologist who has had decades of experience working on our Prairie lakes, and he's offered to answer any questions you may have about our lakes. Our session tonight is entitled Ask the Biologist, an open Q&A session on Prairie lakes with Bruno. Go ahead, Bruno.
Good evening all. As you well aware, my name is Bruno Bruederlin. I've worked for the province for I think it was 39 years or something like that. I started my career in the PAW, and I transferred down here in early 80s there. It's been a wonderful career. There's seen a lot of different projects completed, and and experimentations done. It's quite a rewarding career, especially dealing with the people. That's the neatest part about it. But it's some of the highlights, I think the one that really always, another thing I do is I do aeration. I'm the only one in the province that does lake aeration, and I've installed, designed and installed, and 39 of them across the province. I think, not sure if David Cairns is here, but he is from Gull Lake, yeah. And we initially put that one in there, and it's quite a, well, we'll get into it later, some of the questions there, but it's lake aeration was a big thing that I did. Another thing that's really that is I like is that my reintroduction of lake sturgeon into the Assiniboine River. And presently right now, even today, we were out tracking them. They got acoustic radio tags in them, and we use acoustic receivers to find out where they're going. It's really interesting to reintroduce a dinosaur to the river, and it's all catch and release, obviously, but some of the fish are being caught. They're close to 6.5 feet in length now, which is it's pretty impressive, especially when we were told that would never work. That was the neatest part. That's kind of a feather, I guess, in my hat there, but and so again, lake aeration, another big thing we did down here, and every time I think of lake aeration, I smile when I go by Anton's Lake there at the $1 Million Washroom, as I call it, or the junction at 10 and 16. Like, that was such a positive project. It created a really world-class rainbow trout fishery in the local area there, and I have had numerous requests of finding out where it was and all that, and so those are very positive. And then other things, obviously lake assessment, stocking is really interesting, especially when you meet, a young family at the dock and they're fishing, and you bring up a bag of walleye fry, which are basically 2 eyes, a yolk sac, and a tail, and you show them to the child or the parents or whoever, what this is, and then we're going to be catching bigger walleye from this. It's really rewarding. But yeah, so I don't know, those are some of the things. I can go on. 39 years, you definitely get a lot of different projects you have done, but it's some of the neatest ones that unfortunately we don't do anymore. And again, I'll get into that later. Was riparian buffer zones that we used to create, especially along the Little Saskatchewan River. We work with CMAS. It's Canadian. It's an acronym for Canadian Manitoba Agreement on Agriculture and Sustainability. So the province would put in a third, the feds would put in 2/3, and we fenced off the Little Saskatchewan River from cattle or croplands, and it's just a nutrient loading on these water bodies that is the biggest problem that we have. I can't underestimate that. That's the underlying problem of all our issues on our water bodies in the areas there. So anyhow, that's about a quick blurb there. Any questions? I mean, I can throw them out. I mean, I know every water body has different issues. It could be nutrient loading, it could be sediment loading, it could be water levels, regulated or unregulated, aquatic weed growth like you guys are experiencing in Mendoza there, infilling, dredging of, Rapid City Reservoir. Think about, Mendoza Lake, dredging that one. Every lake's got a specific issue, and so I thought maybe if we could just get some question and answers going back and forth, and maybe somebody that saw a presentation earlier, had a question about a presenter and didn't understand what he was doing or she was doing, and so go from there.
Got a question here on chat, Bruno.
Yep.
Got a question here on chat. As you reflect, what has been your main concern for Prairie Lakes over those years?
I think my main concern is the nutrient loading of these lakes. People have to understand that everything that happens in the watershed ends up into the water, and and that's where I'd love to have some kind of riparian, buffer zone program brought back in it, because I thought it was very successful. I mean, we dealt with a lot of landowners, and when you're talking to them, and they're starting to explaining, the nutrient loading, and especially the cattle guys were phenomenal, because they had less hoof rot the cattle walking to the water, less vet bills. I mean, the water was cleaner. We provided nose pumps, off-stream watering for them. The best example was a guy just downstream of Rapid City there. I mean, he immigrated from the Netherlands there, whenever he immigrated back in the early 80s or something like that, I guess, where he was told that as of a certain date, he would have to fence his cattle off the water course he was on. He came to Canada, and we gave him money for doing it. We even did it ourselves. Like, we hired professional fencers, and he's got a wonderful operation down here, and he was a huge proponent in promoting it in that little Saskatchewan River Valley. Really was. And again, maybe, since that fisheries branch is now hitting in the Department of Agriculture, maybe there might be an opportunity to look at some, nutrient not removal of nutrients, but protecting, water courses flowing into larger water bodies, and, reducing the nutrient load. I think there's other lakes in the area too. Like, I think Jay Taves will be explaining it later there, but it's our next workshop there, but it's at Kerrs Lake. It's quite phenomenal sometimes with the effect that we have in a watershed on a water body.
You were involved in a lot of monitoring, I believe, Bruno, of lake water quality. And it'd be interesting to know what you saw in terms of changes in those results over your time involved with that.
I think, like the water quality, like the water chemistry, I assume you're meaning, like, phosphates, nitrogen, stuff like that. I mean, they're all increasing. Man's activity in the watershed, fast moving water, everything settles out in these water reservoirs like Mendoza, Rapid City, you name it, Kerrs Lake, Lake of the Prairies, everything. They're slowly increasing, and that's causing a lot more algae blooms, vegetation growth. I mean, everything's coming down the stream there.
The other part of it is that you were involved in a lot of communities in selecting and installing aeration systems all across Manitoba, like communities like Gull Lake and many of the lakes around here in central and western areas of the province. Why were those systems installed, and how did some of them pan out?
Well, actually, it's really interesting. These aeration systems would first come from a request from a cottage owners group or a game and fish group or a town or whatever. But it's so it was they approached us, okay, and then but it's interesting though that this is really interesting that aeration never really started to aerate a water body for fish. Aeration started, I mean, this is just before ice came down here. Aeration started as a means to provide a better raw water source for a town's drinking water. Because what they found was that the raw water in the spring without aeration, they have the hydrogen sulfides, ammonias, and it took a lot more chemical to treat the water than it did when it was aerated. So we started, well, actually, the one that started was at Pilot Mound. It was installed because their surface water wasn't meeting surface water, for drinking purposes. So they had to drill wells, and the cost of wells was huge compared to putting an aeration system. So the town council at the time decided to go with aeration. And lo and behold, I don't know who the wise person was. It wasn't me. But lo and behold, they found out that they had good water that was not anoxic, and you could raise fish in it, have a fishery. So that's how it kind of morphed into aeration for fish purposes from what it was originally started, which is, yes, and most lakes that are aerated would not survive a winter without aeration. So that fishery there, be it salmonid or walleye or whatever it is, wouldn't survive. And yeah, it's interesting the start of aeration.
This is a question from a comment that I think you made earlier, Bruno, having to do, I think, is with the remediation and the nutrient loading issue, buffer zones and whatnot. And I think that's what it refers to. And the question is, why did that program fall apart going up the Little Saskatchewan River north of Lake Minnedosa? The fence lines are falling down, et cetera.
Yeah, falling apart. I'm not sure if you meant like the program stopped or landowners weren't. One issue with the program was there was no enforcement from us. I guess we would discuss with the landowner there, and he'd get on board. He'd get his wire, the post, nose pumps, offsite watering, windmills, whatever he wanted, and he would provide about a 30-foot buffer on either side of the river if he's on the river. There's just a lack of enforcement on, I guess. Maybe I don't even know how you enforce a person. The only way you could enforce something like that is I know at Rivers Reservoir we had an issue with an individual that just simply refused to do any fencing on the reservoir to keep the cattle out of the reservoir. But lo and behold, Rivers Reservoir is also a drinking water source for the town of Rivers. So under the Public Health Act, he was approached, and which is, you cannot have cattle. I think the word is loitering in water courses, or something like that. But it's so that's the only way through that law. I mean, there's really not a law that stop it, but I still think of it. I like the program. I really did. I think we got a lot of good PR. And the benefits definitely outweighed the costs. Definitely did.
What factors, Bruno, should a lake community consider prior to actually choosing and installing an aeration system in their lake?
Okay. I guess the community has to decide what they're looking at, right? I mean, as I said, initially it started for drinking water purposes, better raw water. But I think they have to decide, if they want to create a fishery to bring tourism in, like, do you want salmonids, walleye? I mean, if it's on a flow-through system, you don't want salmonids. It would be better to have it in, on walleye, but there comes a lot. I mean, there's issues with aeration too. There's liability issues, huge liability issues. I mean, you're creating open water, and I know about 3 or before I retired, about 2 years, there was a ruling in Alberta that you could not do this because it's against the Criminal Code of Canada. So it caused quite a buzz in Manitoba there, but they got a legal opinion here, and we state the course that, you know, it's as long as the community would sign it or something like that, they would lessen the liability. It doesn't eliminate it; it lessens it, but it's you know, and where is this going to go? There are some noise concerns with aeration. They do create some noise. I mean, but you can mitigate that by you know, doing better insulation on a building and stuff like that. It does create a fishery, which if the group so wanted, you know, they can go ahead and, you know, the funding's available. The only problem is the operating dollars aren't available. So you can put in an aeration system on a lake. Let's say it costs $40,000, but the operating dollars, if it's a 5-horse, 10-horsepower motor, the operating dollars have to come out of, you know, the RM's budget or something like that. And that's where it becomes, you know, people all have to be aware that there is a cost to aeration. It doesn't happen, you know, by itself without people's intervention. You know.
Those are some elements of aeration. When you look ahead, do you see any future developments in application of aeration technologies that might benefit Prairie Lakes? Like, is there likely to be any changes downstream here in that aeration component?
Well, I think, as you know, all technology changes, right? It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, it's the systems that are installed right now in most of the lakes are what they call coarse bubblers. So, and then there's also fine bubbler systems that I think Trevor has down at Pelican Lake. Yeah, basically, it's not the air that's being injected into the water that aerates the water. It's the open water that you create. You get the atmospheric aeration. One of the unfortunate parts is you have to be connected to the hydro grid. For aeration. It's, you know, I know we looked at, there was a remote lake in the Duck Mountains many years ago. We looked at putting in a solar-powered aeration system, but you'd have to have semi-trailer loads of batteries to power this. It's so it was unfeasible. I mean, you know, there's better technology coming from windmills, which is, you know, good too. But again, a lot of those smaller windmills you see on dugouts, those Quendo windmills are designed for, you know, a smaller water body, like 20 by 60, or sorry, 60 by 120 feet in size, and they do a very effective job for a 2-acre pond, but for a lake, you'd have to literally have hundreds on the shore, and then when the wind doesn't blow, they're not aerating, right? So it's interesting because I know at Anton's Lake, when I was designing that one and installing that one, I approached Manitoba Hydro, and my idea at the time, and you know, you're thinking ahead, I guess. Well, I don't know what I was doing, but I was thinking if they could put up a wind turbine there, and would be producing electricity there, obviously to, you know, in the wintertime you draw power, you know, in the summertime you'd pay back into it, and you know, but Hydro at the time wasn't interested in single windmills. They were more interested in windmill farms, but that would have been kind of neat. I tried selling it as a really good PR for windmills in Manitoba, you know, for wind turbines, but it didn't quite fly. But I would have been kind of neat at that, as I call it, the $1 million washroom, but it didn't materialize. So
I'm just going to take a little break here to remind the participants to feel free to put your hand up, and we'll unmute your mic for you so you can ask your question in person.
Or if there's even you know, some kind of issue on your lake, like, you know, yeah, let's hear about your lakes. I mean, what do you think the major issue is on, you know, I don't know, I'm looking at the list here, you know, any lake. I mean, it's you know, because they all have different issues and all that. I know on Gull Lake there, I'm going to put David on the spot here. I know on Gull Lake, when you designed the aeration system, and I can't remember the individual at the time, the gentleman's name. Anyhow, I can't remember what I had for breakfast either. But anyhow, I can't remember his name. But it's I know at the time we put the aeration system in there. The cottage owners in the area passed a resolution that prohibited fertilizing of lawns that right on the shores of the lake. You know, I mean, there was this whole write-up of how many pounds of nutrient, you know, runs off into the lake from the lawns that are fertilized. Yeah, I thought that was really forward thinking. I think at the time, it's I don't know if that's still in the place, David, or not, or.
You know what? That was years and years and years ago, long before any of my time. I know that I'm pretty sure the guy's name was Stan that you would have spoken with back then. And I know even to this day, we still tell people not to put any fertilizers or anything on their lawns. I know years ago when the aeration was put in, we changed the septic field bylaws so that all the black water now goes into a separate tank. I believe that if you do a renovation or your septic field needs to be replaced, we're not allowed to anymore. I'm not sure exactly what the laws are right now, but I know, like I said, that was years and years before my time when you guys did the original aeration system out here. But like I said, every year we give reminders not to fertilize their lawns, just to be aware of what people are using for chemicals around the lake.
That's excellent. That's the forward thinking, because, you know, I mean, everybody, not everybody, but people think that aeration is the magic bullet that's going to save a lake. I mean, but if you have continuous nutrient loading on a water body, or you know, I mean, yeah, the aeration is going to be undersized before you even know it. And yeah, I just thought I always use that example when I'm talking to other groups here about, you know, what cottage owners can do in the area. I'm not sure if the RM was, I think it was cottage owners, the association, you know, but it's.
It was a cottage owner association. The RM had I believe the province mandated the board that I'm president of years and years ago, and the RM paid a portion of it. I know they contribute to our cost of running it every year. For the size of it, I'd agree with you that your lake is like they're becoming small for the lake. Our lake is way overpopulated for the amount of area that we have. I think the aerator does a good job, but I'm not the scientist, so I don't. I mean, it does a good job in my aspect, but whether it's really doing a good job, I don't know. We get complaints about the water in the summertime not being clear, whereas I know when you guys first installed it, it turned the lake around immensely. It was night and day. It was a dying lake, and that truly saved the lake. Now we have water level issues. The water levels are going down. We've got gravel pits around the area that a lot of people are afraid that they're going to drill too or dig too deep, and we're going to drain part of the lake. We've got a sediment on the bottom now that comes up as when the boats stir it up in the summertime, so the water is no longer as clear as it was back then. Whether that's an aeration issue or just the water level and too many geese in the spring and fall, I wouldn't know the answer to that. I guess I could get the water tested and find out what that sediment is, but I haven't done that yet.
It's Daryl. David, how do you guys aerate? Is it just in the winter for fish kills, or is it summer and winter?
We just do it in the wintertime, just before the lake freezes. We turn it on. From what I understand, the boats do a better job aerating than the actual aerator for the cost of it. If it was a need to be on all year round, we could do it, but we don't. It's just in the winter right now.
Yeah, in the summertime, you'll get a lot of wind action and wave action, and that does a lot for aeration. That's how you're aerating the lakes there. But no, I think, you know, Gull Lake is a pretty good success story in that area there. I mean, yeah, and that's an issue. Like, you know, as I think you hit it on the head there, David. It's that there's a lot of more development around water bodies now, and there's a limit to what these poor water bodies can keep doing. You know, I mean, Mother Nature is pretty resilient, but you have to give her a hand, you know, sometimes.
Jim here. I see a question that we haven't asked yet that's come in by Dick Uke. Do the nutrients in lakes settle out or degrade over time?
No, I mean, a lot of times those lakes, I mean, it depends if they're attached to the sediments and all that. I mean, as I think David said, you get the bottom of the lake with that ooze on it, as it's technically called as loon shit. But I mean, it becomes really anaerobic. It's those nutrients. I mean, there was a study done on. I think you guys are all aware of it. I think I talked to Daryl about it on Shoal Lake. They're down in the mid 70s or 80s by El Bec there, where the nutrients you get all these experiments and all that and tests and all that, but 60% of the nutrients just recycle within the lake itself. It's if you eliminated all the flow coming in from the north end of the Oak River and everything else, all the runoff of the land, you'd still have the nutrients just recycling in the lake. So it's once they're in there, they're in there. You know, the only way they're taking up some of the nutrients are by aquatic vegetation and or fish, and so that kind of segues nicely into you know, the Lake Minnedosa situation where you're looking at mechanical weed harvesting. I mean, you're taking nutrients out of the lake in vegetation form, I guess. So yeah, it is a method.
Bruno, it's Chris here from Cranberry.
Yep, hi, Chris.
Just what about the implications of drainage and nutrient loading and pushing more nutrients into those water bodies that otherwise might just sort of settle out, on its own. How big of a problem is that in your mind? And I know wetland drainage is a huge issue in southern Manitoba, but in your mind, thinking about these prairie lakes as individual bodies of water that people are interested in, the implications of cumulative wetland drainage and other drainage situations on nutrient loading in these bodies of water.
You're totally correct there, Chris. I mean, a lot of those nutrients come from miles and miles away. And all these lakes are getting, drainage is definitely, there where people start cutting, drains, connecting this little slough to that little slough into this municipal ditch to this municipal ditch. It all goes downstream, right? And it all ends up in water bodies, and the effect is massive over time. And individually, it might not be that big of a thing, but cumulatively over time, is huge.
Kind of that statement of death by 1,000 cuts.
Yep. Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
I'm thinking the reason why I raised this, because I kind of knew the issue, but in terms of management and what lake groups can do, what would you recommend to cut, to try to offset some of those things?
I know just before I retired, there was a program, not sure if it was from Ducks Unlimited or from Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation, but reinstituting these potholes, reconstructing potholes on some of these drains. So at least you slow the water down. The sediments could settle out in these retention ponds or whatever you want to call them, and it, technically cleaner water flows into the lakes. It's, reestablishing the potholes. I mean, they were there for a reason, right? I mean, they're big filters, and without them, the water goes directly into those lakes. I know there was a study done, decades ago, where they treated some, up by Russell, they put some radioisotopes on some sediment and something like that. But anyhow, it was detected in Lake Winnipeg about 2 years later. Like the distance that stuff travels is amazing. It's the nutrient loading, I think, is a huge issue. I mean, up north where you are, it's not that. I mean, it is an issue, but not like it's down here. I mean, in Agro-Manitoba, right. It's massive. It really, really is.
Okay, thank you.
Bruno, another question. If a lake community didn't have an aeration system and also had rather low levels of dissolved oxygen, what things could they do as intervention measures?
Yeah, that's a good one. Is that Daryl's? But it's that's an excellent question. It's I mean, when I was still employed, working down here, we used to monitor about 50 to 100 lakes every winter for dissolved oxygen levels, and for various reasons. I mean, for obviously for testing anoxic conditions and all that, but for maybe designing aeration systems down the way in the future, or for future stocking purposes, or just for information. But yeah, when a lake starts exhibiting signs of anoxic conditions, I mean, there was a couple things we did years ago there. I mean, one was snow clearing. I mean, but again, the whole idea about snow clearing came from northern Germany, where an individual went out every time it snowed a little bit and swept the entire 5-acre pond off, and he found that the oxygen levels were phenomenal. I mean, so we tried using that same idea, same principle, and we did snow, but again, in our lakes, like in Rock Lake and Oak Lake, they're quite a bit larger than 5 acres. And so they suggest in the literature that I read that you have to clear about 10% of the lake. But again, to clear 10% of the lake, you need a grader, and to handle that weight, you have to wait for about 3 to 4 feet of ice, and I don't think there's an RM on this planet that wants to drive the grader on lakes anymore, but they did back then. But again, the work we did at Oak Lake there, and we cleared literally huge areas at Oak Lake back in the late 80s there. The oxygen levels were significantly higher in the cleared areas than they were in the snow-covered areas. I think what happens under the ice, you get the phytoplankton, zooplankton kind of going at it, reproducing and stuff like that, and producing oxygen, and but again, I don't think it's feasible anymore. It's the liability issues of pushing up huge windrows of snow and all that. It'd be a liability issue, but
You probably had some results from that effort at Oak Lake as well, then, Bruno.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, as I say, they weren't significantly. I mean, they were higher. The dissolved oxygens were definitely higher. I mean, which was encouraging, and and at the time, like we were looking for anything. I mean, that was in the late 80s, when the water levels at Oak Lake there were so low, you'd have to walk about a quarter mile from the beach to find water. So I mean, there wasn't a lot of water left in that lake, and another idea that we looked at too was, and I think we talked about this earlier, was emergency aeration baffles. And basically the idea there was you have a 12-foot chute, I guess. I'm talking with my hands here, sorry. About a 12-foot chute with baffles welded in about every foot apart, and you elevate one end of the chute about a 45-degree angle, and the bottom you're running back in the lake. And what you do is you pump lake water, surface lake water, to the top of the chute, and it run down back into the lake there. And I know at Oak Lake, we did piles of work at Oak Lake with this. We would draw water into the pump at about 2 parts per million. It was discharged out of the end of the baffle back in the lake at 12 parts. The idea wasn't to create, the idea wasn't to aerate the entire lake or attempt to aerate the entire lake, but the idea was to create a bay of oxygenated water that fish out in the lake could get attracted to. I mean, and it was pumping about 1,200, 1,600 gallons a minute. So there was quite an attractive flow under the water, under the ice, I should say, aerated flow, and that they would pick up on. So that was an idea. I mean, but there's not a lot that can be done. I mean, besides the emergency aeration baffle, that was kind of an interesting idea, but and I think there's still some of them around. We use it at many lakes. I think Kerr Lake even had one at one time there, prevented the winter kill there. But it's, again, without regular dissolved oxygen monitoring, you wouldn't even know this is happening, so it's, and that's kind of critical in knowing that something's happening and then looking at doing something. But finding out in the spring you have dead fish in the shoreline, it's a little too late then.
Do a lot of lake communities actually monitor their lake water on a regular basis, and should we be?
You mean the dissolved oxygen levels, you mean? Or,
That and pH and conductivity, some of the other.
I don't think a lot do. No. I mean, the province, we used to do it all. But as everybody is aware, as government gets smaller, this is where it's critical, like groups like this, maybe start, purchasing, dissolved oxygen meters. They're not not an expensive piece of equipment, but at least it gives you an idea what the oxygen levels is. And the same with pH meters. They're not super expensive either. It's, and to train a person to do it is quite simple. I think that's the way it's going to go, that there's going to be less and less government involvement than there has been in the past. I think we all see that.
That leads into the next question here in chat. And this is Dennis, by the way.
Okay.
Bruno, I should have introduced myself to start with. Sorry. Which government department currently is actually responsible for water quality in our lakes and watersheds in Manitoba? And I presume that's for monitoring it and taking action on it.
That's, I don't know who's responsible anymore. They've changed names so many times. To be honest, I don't know. I really don't. I know fisheries did a lot of monitoring, but that was for a different purpose. I think Manitoba Environment might do some. Is there a specific issue that you have on a lake that you want looked at?
I think the question likely comes from the, in respect of, I suspect, the water quality that would prevent us from swimming and perhaps.
Like blue-green algae and all that. Yeah, that's, it used to be done out of Brandon here. There used to be individuals here, but I don't think they're here anymore. I believe they're all out of Winnipeg now. Sorry, I just can't think of the name. I can see the people, but I can't see the name. But sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, Bruno, I think it was Brian Martineau who asked that question. This is Daryl. Brian, if you want me to ask you to unmute yourself, you can carry that conversation a little farther.
Hello, Brian.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you, Brian.
Well, the reason that I asked the question is in the last 2.5 years, that's kind of what we haven't been able to pin down. Nobody seems to be responsible. Everybody passes the buck to somebody else. And it's very difficult to know how to move forward when you can't get any help from anybody. And we looked at several different things, and we just kind of got pushed off. Well, that's so-and-so's responsibility. And then we went to an application by Cool Spring Colony north of Lake Minnedosa, who are wanting to increase their barns at their intensive livestock operation. And it appeared to us that we're at the meeting as an example when we talk about nutrient loading, that the department that does that, they don't even take into consideration, in all honesty, that there might be some nutrient loading. And some of the comments that were made in meetings with various government agencies, it comes to the point where, as you said before, there is no accountability at all. Cool Spring Colony are not meeting their conditional use permit that they have now, and yet the province is prepared to, they actually approved it, and of course the RM have to have the final say. And it was quite disturbing to see what was going on there. So it just seems that it isn't a priority from our viewpoint from the province. MIT are in charge of the dam. We've got stop logs. There's more water running through the stop logs than there is over them. This has been going on for 3 or 4 years. We tried to attempt a meeting with MIT and the town, and this is the Friends of Lake Minnedosa, when we suggested we try and get the lake level up a foot going back a couple years. And when MIT found out that 3 or 4 of us from the general public were going to be in attendance, they said, if those people are there, we're not coming out. So it's, that's to me just not right. And of course, they did have the meeting because we said, well, we're not going to do anything to stop the meeting. But, it just seems like the buck gets passed around from one group to the other and nothing ever seems to get done. And that's the thing. I think if we don't have a department that's ultimately responsible for the water quality, for our watersheds, and for our lakes, then we're kind of treading water, no pun intended. So I don't know what we do about that.
Yeah, no, I hear you, Brian, and I guess I'll apologize on behalf of, some of those people there. I don't know why things aren't investigated. We all have our bosses and everything else, but it just comes down to what's right and wrong. Yeah, sometimes, I think in Chris's last presentation there last week there, I think he hit the nail right on the head, and is to, I'm not saying that you guys aren't, but to maintain try maintaining a good working relationship with government officials, because they're not your enemy. But again, I hear you. I'm not saying that, but then, maybe they're not helping as much as you might want them to be helping. Or monitoring. I had a boss. So if somebody didn't like what I did, they went to my boss, and then I'd hear about it, right? So you're not trying to sick people on people, but sometimes stuff flows downhill, right? And maybe going. I'll find out. I think Randy just sent something about who does the water quality testing. I believe it's done out of Winnipeg here, but I will get you the name of the person out here that's responsible, or you can contact or something like that, and hopefully we'll get some help.
We're currently taking a look. The Royal Bank has a program. Now this would be testing water on the Lower Saskatchewan, north of our lake, on our lake, down the lake from us. And I think it basically Minnedosa, Rapid City, rivers suffer from the same issues.
Yes, I agree.
We're on the river.
Yeah.
So we're suffering from silt deposition. Minnedosa probably as much as anybody, because we're the first stop. Rapid City got, it's a very small lake, and I don't think it takes a ton of silt to fill it in. I'm no expert, and then rivers, of course, suffers from the same things as us. Now, we have normally, under a normal year, a pretty good amount of water that flows through that lake. But so we haven't experienced, I've been on that lake for 44 years, and we haven't experienced a lot of algae. Couple times really in that 44 years, and 2019 being one of them, but it was a bad year everywhere. But it seems to me that if we're going to stop any kind of silt deposition long term, it's got to be, as you said, stopped in the river north. We've got to be able to have an area. And if you get flow through like we had last year, you're not stopping anything. That water was, we had 7 feet of vertical water come on that lake. Yeah. So you're not stopping much when the water's coming through there that fast. But we just can't seem to get any answers from anybody. And it's very frustrating. And I think that as a group, what we have to do is we have to somewhere sit down with the government and say, okay, who's responsible for it? How can we work with 5 different people who seem to want to pass something off to that's that department, MIT. MIT don't have a clue about lakes. And I don't really think they care about lakes, to be honest with you. So we're going to do a presentation in a couple of weeks to talk about why we formed, how we formed, and where we're at today. But we did have our MLA out, and he basically said, until you get the local governments, which is the RM and the town involved, nothing is going to happen. So, but I just wondered, Bruno, if you had any idea who really is responsible. You know, we get sustainable development, fisheries, whatever. There's about 3 or 4 different ones, but nobody seems to give us any answers, really. And we did get some water testing on our lake this summer, and the province did pay for it, but we've been kind of told that's not going to go on forever. So we're looking at some other alternatives, and we're looking at maybe Brandon University or ACC, part of their program in the biology program, seeing if we can put anything together. And we are looking at, there's a Royal Bank thing that they do, but it's a very complicated thing. But we are looking at applying for something in 2022. I would dearly like to have Rapid City and Rivers involved, because I think if we did that as a whole system, then we could get maybe some funding. I'm going to be working on that in the next couple of weeks, dealing with the Royal, and I'm not sure if we'll be successful, but we think that might be an opportunity. So if they can pay for a program that has the university students go out and do the work, and we can cover some of the costs from them, i.e. purchasing equipment and training and stuff, and it can be part of their biology program, I would think we'd want to do that for a minimum of 5 years and see if we can come up with any kind of data that would say, yeah, the nutrient loading is increasing. Maybe it isn't, but we don't know unless we do testing on a regular basis, I assume. I'll let it go at that. Thanks.
No, exactly. It goes back to what my major concern, I think, is the nutrient loading, and and again, the Little Saskatchewan River. I mean, maybe it was a small program at the time, the riparian protection program, but I think it had a lot of merit. You got a lot of information, education out to landowners of what not to do around water, and it's. But you're right. Once that nutrient-rich and sediment-rich water hits like Lake Minnedosa and Rapid City and Rivers, it stays there. It settles out. I think that's that is our biggest problem. It just yeah, it's a tough one. I hear you. I sense your frustration in your voice, and I sympathize with it. It's another form of funding possibly there, Brian, would be go to the Fisheries Wallet Enhancement Fund, the FWEP fund. I mean, there's $1 million every year, and maybe the Brandon University in their geography department might want to have a master's student that wants to do nutrient loading on the Little Saskatchewan River from Lake Audie to the confluence of the Cinnamon River. I mean, you've seen it. I mean, it's some of those lakes are getting greener and greener, and we dredged the reservoir once, the lake during the Canada Games there, and it's in the rivers, the North End of Rivers Reservoir. I mean, you can walk across it. Sometimes it's so shallow with mud. It's rich with nutrients.
Jay, I know that it's Dennis here. I know that you're going to be speaking about this next week. Wondering if you might like to make a few comments now, just ahead of that.
Well, sure. Maybe I'll just give a little teaser, and that I'll be talking next week about Kerr Lake, and many of the issues that came up tonight I'll be touching on, and at least kind of frame what kind of questions and answers questions can be asked and questions that can be asked and answers that can be provided. There's been a lot of work in other jurisdictions, in particular around lake management and nutrient management and algae management, vegetation management, a lot of different strategies out there, a lot of different systems. And so it becomes more of a decision-making process than just wondering what can be done and taking a stab in the dark, and sometimes making some decisions that involve budget decisions. We can do the math and know what kind of benefit to expect from different strategies, and both in terms of dollar value and
nutrient removal and that sort of thing. So I'll talk to a few of those things, and won't have all the answers to build on tonight in a short meeting next week, but we'll certainly get a better feel for what can be answered a little bit. So I just want to thank you, Bruno. Great work and everything that you've been pioneering here in Manitoba. It's been spectacular. I think I first started asking you questions in 1996. And you've provided me with many answers since then, for sure. So do appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I think we'll allow one more question for Bruno, and then we should shut down by the end of the hour. Is there any more questions there, Dennis?
I think Randy Abbott has a question here.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Bruno, I live at Ditch Lake currently, and we've had a couple of water studies done over the last 20 years. And the one in the mid-'80s that was done suggested that a lot of the nutrients was coming with spring runoffs or big rain events that were coming in through some ditches that we have that have go along the roadside and empty directly into the lake, and they come right off of farm fields. We're almost like a bowl here with an opening at the south end. Is there anything you can do in those ditches specifically to try and slow down or prevent some of that nutrient loading? I know Lawrence Bertram has been quite enthused about the whole idea of planting cattails and stuff like that, but they're basically 4-foot ditches that are about 4 feet wide. There's a couple of them here, and they run like a creek in the spring or any big rain events.
Yeah, good question, Randy. You might want to go a bit further back where the water is actually coming from. You know, I mean, if it's, a 4-foot ditch, 4 feet deep is going to be, those poor cattails don't have the ability to take up the nutrients. So, I mean, they're just ripping by. If you had some kind of, like I said, before I left there, we were talking about making these, reestablishing potholes and along maybe the ditch or something like that. I mean, it's a short-term duration, I guess, that the water would be there, but, you know, you might be able to get some nutrient, uptake or something like that. Is it coming from farmlands far away, Randy, or is it local, or where is it?
Yeah, it's local. The lake has farmland on 3 of its 4 sides, and the whole south side of the lake has another small lake that's surrounded by forest, basically, but also agricultural land on one side. And the rolling river drains directly either into the lake or back out of the lake at the south end, depending on how high the water is.
Yeah.
Right. I should mention that the Biosphere Reserve is also looking at ways to harvest water on farm. And one of the concepts is to develop these contour wetlands that can stop the water and let it infiltrate before it runs off. So that's another thing that the Biosphere is working on, and I would like to talk to you further on that, Bruno, going forward. But we're pretty much at the end of our session for tonight, and maybe we'll have to have a panel when we get finished things here with Bruno and Jay and maybe some folks from IISD or whatever. We'll have to figure that out, but I think we should wrap up the session for tonight, and I'd like to thank you, Bruno, for a fantastic Q&A. You really got us worked up here to go forward. Our next workshop is on January the 20th at 7 p.m. It's a presentation by Jay Taubes with a case study on Kerrs Lake. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us, and all the best to you and your families.